All right, friends, good morning. Great to be here with you all today. This is a good turnout. Thank you all for being here and for participating in this class on learning theology with C.S. Lewis during the course of Lent. Can everyone hear me okay? Do I need to speak up? I'm still recovering from a little bit of a cold. So if I don't speak up, just feel free to raise your hand and tell me to talk louder. I was wrestling with a printer for a while this morning. That's why I'm coming in at just the last minute. But I want to make sure that everyone has the handouts that I pass out to you all. Hopefully we'll get a chance to reference all three of those. If not, that's okay. But I want to open us with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for calling us together during this holy season of Lent, for a time of self-examination, of confession, of repentance, and of almsgiving. We ask that you would send your Spirit to be among us today as we hear what C.S. Lewis has to say to each of us, and we hear anew the good news of the gospel of your Son. We ask this in his powerful name. Amen. Amen. All right, I want to say just a couple words real quick about sort of what I hope to accomplish. I didn't expect there to be like a podium up here. I feel very like didactic and professorial, but hopefully maybe we can spread out over a table or something in the coming weeks. But just a word about what I want us to accomplish over these next few weeks. As the title of the course suggests, I want to learn some theology with C.S. Lewis as our guide. This is not an exhaustive survey over the life and works of C.S. Lewis by any means. This is using C.S. Lewis as a guide to learn a little bit more about Christian theology so that we can hear the gospel with fresh ears, renewed attention, and be moved this Lent to grow a little bit deeper in our Christian faith. I should also add that we shouldn't read C.S. Lewis. I'm sure that many of you have exposure to Lewis of varying degrees. Maybe many of you read the fantasy literature when you were a child, or as an adult, you read it to your children. Maybe you've read his Space trilogy, which is some of the most interesting stuff that he ever wrote. He wrote 3 sci-fi novels. Maybe you've read some of his Christian apologetics, Christian theology. Maybe you've read his work in medieval studies. Maybe you have read a piece of philosophy. Lewis is a lot of things, many things to many people. But we shouldn't read him as an absolute authority. He is a guide for us along the way, offering us some signposts that point us back to the truth of the gospel. And so there will likely be some things that we read along the way by Lewis, some ideas that we encounter that we will disagree with, and that is okay. I want to encourage you to lean into those disagreements and to question Lewis, and question yourself along the way. And second, the last thing that I'll say is about all those books. So if you saw the email invitation that went out, and also that's reproduced with some minor edits in this handout, there are a lot of books listed here week by week. Someone asked me on the way in, were we supposed to read the book? And the answer is no, of course not. I do not want the long list of titles to get in the way of anyone showing up here to learn a little bit about theology with Lewis. If your life allows you to read along the way, then that is wonderful, and I encourage you to do that. But you're not going to lose anything for our time together by not having read anything along the way. Does that make sense? I want this to be a sampling, an introduction, so that you can find what you're interested in, and then later on you can pursue those lines of inquiry, those books yourself. Okay? And then you can always talk to me or others about them as you read them. One thing I will point out real quick is I printed out this list of the texts that I was just referring to. I've made one or two slight changes to it, so I just want to bring that to your attention if you do want to read along the way. The biggest change is the last week, week 5, 1 month from today. We were going to look at Lewis's very short but very dense book called The Abolition of Man, which, to my understanding, is one of the most important works of moral philosophy written in the 20th century. But it's kind of a heavy lift, and it's short. It's depending on the edition you read, anywhere from 40 to 60 pages. But there's a lot packed in there, and it's pretty dense. And it would be kind of impossible to do it justice in 1 week, but it's very, I encourage you to read it. But we're just going to focus on the screw tape letters that last week instead, which is a very intuitive and insightful work of human psychology and of the psychology of sin. But other than that, it's mainly what went out through the email. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about Lewis's life, his life and his works, and particularly looking at some texts from his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, which some of you may have had the chance to look at. I'm going to offer a few biographical remarks about C.S. Lewis himself, just to frame our time together and frame the course. I'm going to be doing a lot more talking today than I will be in future weeks. I want this to be very discussion-based, very text-based. We're going to look at a short piece of writing every time. We'll read it out loud together, discuss it. But I do want to tell you a little bit about his life first, okay? So that we can get our bearings. C.S. Lewis was born in Belfast, he's Irish, on November 29th, 1898. And he died on November 22nd, 1963, which was the same day as John F. Kennedy and the British novelist and philosopher Aldous Huxley, who wrote the dystopian novel Brave New World. There's actually an interesting little imaginative play or book that's written about the three men as they sit on the threshold of heaven and hell. I think it's called Between Heaven and Hell. Huxley actually reviewed some of Lewis's sci-fi books. He liked them. But that is just an aside. That puts Lewis's life squarely within the time frame of the bloodiest events of the 20th century. He lived through both of the world wars. He witnessed the Great War with his own eyes, and he taught and he wrote during the Second World War. It's important to read his books, everything that he wrote, with that in the front of your mind, always. It can't be overstated, right? He's speaking to mostly a European audience at the time that was witnessing not only the threat of totalitarianism, but that was also facing a religious and a spiritual crisis. How could belief in a good and powerful God be sustained in the aftermath of the war? Could there be a religious future for Europe when millions of Europeans, most of them Christians, were at odds with each other and had slaughtered one another in two great wars? Lewis was the son of an Irish solicitor in a pretty secular, established Protestant community in Belfast. Though he did, in his time, he encountered some of the sectarian violence between Catholics and Protestants in Belfast in his young age. He didn't really write very much about that. And as you may know, Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, almost never went by his given name. He almost always went by the name Jack. When he was a young child, he and his brother had a dog that they named Jaxie, and Jaxie was killed in a carriage accident. And after he was killed, Lewis sort of adopted his name. He was 4 years old, adopted the name Jaxie himself, and it just stuck. All of his family and friends knew him by the name Jack. Not to put Lewis on the couch too much, but I think we should say just something about the relationship that he had with his father and his mother. He writes in Surprised by Joy that from my earliest years, I was aware of the vivid contrast between my mother's cheerful and tranquil affection and the ups and downs of my father's emotional life. And this bred in me, long before I was old enough to give it a name, a certain distrust or dislike of emotion as something uncomfortable and embarrassing and even dangerous. He did not have a good relationship with his father. I think that's important. He distrusts emotion from a young age, and yet after his conversion to Christianity, his works are so incredibly emotionally intuitive. If you read the Screwtape Letters, which we'll read a couple of them in a few weeks, he is very, very much in tune with the inner life and the emotional life. But that wasn't always the case. During these early years, he was raised in a Christian household, but it was sort of a facile religious belief. There wasn't much conviction behind their religious belief. In Surprised by Joy, he writes that when he was young, he had approached God, or at least his idea of God, without love, without awe, and without fear. God was even in my mental picture of this miracle to appear merely as a magician. And when he had done what was required of him, I supposed that he would simply, go away. That's, of course, not uncommon, to treat God as a magician, a wish-granting machine. Lewis, when he was growing up, he did have a happy early childhood. He grew up surrounded by books, mounds and mounds of books. He read Beatrix Potter, which made a huge impression on him as a young boy. He read a lot of poetry, and his family was relatively well off. But then when he was 9 years old, Lewis's world was turned completely on its head when his mother fell ill. And within a few months of falling ill, she was diagnosed with cancer and she died. He was only 9 years old at the time. And this made what was already a very turbulent relationship with his father, who, as you remember, had big emotional ups and big emotional downs. That made it even worse. Lewis tells us in Surprised by Joy that his father never fully recovered from the loss of his wife. He writes this about the way he and his brother related to his father after his mother's death. Quote, "Perhaps if we had been better children," he and his brother, "perhaps if we had been better children, we might have lightened our father's sufferings at this time. We certainly did not. His nerves have never been of the steadiest, and his motions had always been uncontrolled. Under the pressure of anxiety, his temper became incalculable. He spoke wildly and acted unjustly. Thus, by a peculiar cruelty of fate, during those months, the unfortunate man, he had but known it, was really losing his sons as well as his wife. We were coming, my brother and I, to rely more and more exclusively on each other for all that made life bearable, to have confidence only in each other. With my mother's death, all settled happiness, all that was tranquil and reliable, had just disappeared. There was to be much fun, many pleasures, many stabs of joy, but no more of the old security. It was sea and islands now. The great continent had sunk like Atlantis. All security seemed to be taken away from me, and there was no solid ground beneath my feet. If you've ever lost someone that you love, you may relate to that feeling, there being no solid ground beneath your feet. After his mother's death, Lewis was sent away by his father to boarding school in England. He had a tutor at home before, but after his mother died, his father sent he and his brother away. And this became a pretty unstable situation. He went to school in England, but that school closed within a few months of him getting there because they didn't have enough pupils. So he was sent back to Ireland, and then a few months later he was sent back to England. And so he had sort of he jumped around quite a bit as a really young boy. Remember, he was 9 years old during this time, and in the following years. And during this time of sort of bouncing between schools and colleges in England, two very important things happened to him. The first thing that happened was that he discovered Greek and Norse mythology that he loved until the day he died. The myths of Greek and Norse mythology, they didn't only feed into his imagination in ways that would appear later on in the Chronicles of Narnia and in the Space Trilogy, which have overtones of both in their work. But it also introduced an entirely new spiritual and affective dimension to his whole life. As we'll talk about soon, mythology was one of the places that helped awaken joy within him. We'll talk about what that means later on. During this time, he would also, though, read poetry. He read Yeats. He met Yeats early on. George MacDonald, who was a Scottish fantasy writer and theologian. MacDonald appears in The Great Divorce. He's sort of Lewis's guide through the threshold of heaven, kind of like Virgil is Dante's guide through the Inferno in the Divine Comedy. He was very inspired by George MacDonald. MacDonald was one of the first English fantasy writers. He helped develop the genre, and his book Fantasies, Lewis read and digested. Lewis read Dante. He read Virgil. He read G.K. Chesterton, which leads to the second thing that happened to Lewis during this time. First thing was that he discovered mythology that he loved. The second thing is that he became a very convinced atheist. He writes during this time of going from school to school, quote, "I maintained that God did not exist. I was also very angry with God for not existing. I was equally very angry with God for creating a world." He was very bitter during this time. He had already been through a lot of suffering. He had a father who didn't really love him, or at least he felt like didn't really love him. It was complicated. He had a mother who had a lot of affection for him, but she was gone. She was taken away from him from a young age. And now he was sent on this circuit tour of the United Kingdom, going from school to school to school. He did well in school, and in 1917, he was 18 years old, he entered the Officers' Training Corps at Oxford University. He entered Oxford, and shortly afterward, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the British Army in the final days of the First World War. Within a few months, he was shipped off to France to fight. He arrived there on his 19th birthday in the trenches. And he didn't talk a whole lot about the trenches for the remainder of his life. It was surely traumatic for him. He was injured in a bombing, and two of his closest friends were killed in the same bombing right before his eyes. So he's injured. He's sent home. He's not a stranger to suffering. A lot of the times that people, their sort of stock critique of C.S. Lewis is that, he's like this, stuffy, curmudgeon-y Oxford Don who's, up in his ivory tower writing novels and leading the intellectual life, and he has, this, which is all true, but also he was no stranger to real profound suffering in life. So it's important to keep both those things in mind. So he comes back from the war, and he returns to Oxford. And he never completes the doctoral degree, actually, which is interesting. He's studying English and literature and Latin and Greek. He's a classicist by training and a medievalist. He has no formal training in theology. I think that's really important to see too, which is actually kind of good for his theology. It makes it interesting to read. So he's trained in all of the classics, and as he continues at Oxford. He eventually is awarded a fellowship at Oxford, though he never obtained the doctorate. And he took a post teaching English, medieval studies, and eventually philosophy as well. And a few important things happened to him during his fellowship here at Oxford. The first is continuing to read the kinds of books that awakened joy within him, and him noticing the kinds of books that awakened joy within him. And remember, he's a convinced atheist during this time. He not only has lost his mother, now he has seen the sort of the horrors of trench warfare, and he is certain God does not exist. And so he's reading atheists during this time, but he's finding all the atheists that he reads incredibly boring. He writes, all the books that I was reading, were beginning to turn on me. Indeed, I must have been blind as a bat, not to have seen long before the ludicrous contradiction between my theory of life and my actual experiences as a reader. George MacDonald had done more to me than any other writer. Remember, MacDonald's the fantasy, the theologian guy. Of course, it was a pity had that bee in his bonnet about Christianity. He was good in spite of it. Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, had more sense than all the other moderns put together. Baiting, of course, is Christianity. The most religious writers, Plato, Aeschylus, Virgil, were clearly those on whom I could really feed. On the other hand, those writers who did not suffer from religion, and with whom, in theory, my sympathy ought to have been complete, all seemed a little thin. They were what as boys we called tinny. There seemed to be no depth in them. They were too simple. The roughness and the density of life did not appear in their books. The Oxford Fellowship also expanded the social circles that Lewis was exposed to. When he began officially teaching for the English faculty, he made two significant friends, H.V.V. Dyson and someone else you may have heard of before, J.R.R. Tolkien, both of whom were Christians. Lewis writes, both Christians, these strange people seemed now to pop up on every side, who were later to give me much help in getting over the last stile. They were H.V.V. Dyson and J.R.R. Tolkien. Friendship with the latter marked the breakdown of two old prejudices. At my first coming into the world, I had been implicitly warned never to trust a papist. And Tolkien, of course, is a very devout Catholic. And at my first coming into the English faculty, explicitly, never to trust a philologist. Tolkien was both. Eventually, the friendship that he developed with these men, often involving leisurely activities, long nights, chatting in the college, drinking at local pubs in Oxford, this would lead to his conversion, which is where we're going to pick up with reading Surprised by Joy in just a moment. I've left out a lot about Lewis's life that we can talk about in later weeks, but I want to sort of get us to the threshold of his conversion. I left out details about his short marriage to Joy Davidman. It was about 3 years before she died. If you've ever read his little book, A Grief Observed, that's basically his diary after his wife died. I left out everything about the Inklings and all that had meant for him, but I want to talk about his conversion to Christianity and Surprised by Joy. So let's look at that together. There are two moments, two handouts that I gave to you from that text. One of them, the front and back one, we're going to look at first. How much time do we have? Oh, we're good. Before we move on to Surprised by Joy, any questions or thoughts? I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but again, I won't be doing this much in weeks to come. Yeah. No, I don't believe so. No, they were sort of shipped off separately. Yeah. Yes.
Would you like a cup of water?
That would be wonderful, actually. Thank you, Greg. Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
I don't mean to debase this offering for the suggestion on a TV program.
Yeah.
But if any of you have watched Pluribus on Apple, to me, it's a construct derived from Huxley's Brave New World.
Yeah.
And you can see how what he was trying to express in literature, you can actually visualize it. Really interesting.
Yeah. It's called Pluribus? Just Pluribus. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, Deborah.
The only other thing that I'd add that I think may have contributed to his feelings of estrangement or alienation is he was Irish.
Yeah.
Of course, he's being sent to English boarding schools and to English tutors.
Yeah.
And it's something he talks about a bit at the beginning.
Yeah.
But then it kind of disappears, and I find it really interesting when you listen to recordings of him. There's absolutely no trace of an Irish accent. He was really acculturated into Oxbridge education and more that, later on. But I also wondered how much that contributed to his feelings of anger, rebellion against institutions, leaders, as well. Because such a class-conscious society.
Yeah, that's right. He writes in Surprised by Joy being sort of shocked when he's sent off. Like it's like the consciousness of being Irish like sort of hits him for a first time as he goes off to this boarding school and everyone around him's talking all funny and they think he talks all funny and it felt like a second-class citizen in a way, being Irish, but he did assimilate like really profoundly. Yeah.
There's no more football or Olympics, so that Reluctant Convert, which is on Amazon, I think.
Yes.
If you guys have Amazon, it's called The Reluctant Convert, and it's his life story with him talking about it while he looks at himself, another actor as his youngster. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and that little phrase, reluctant convert, we're going to encounter that in a second. The most reluctant convert in all of England, he calls himself. Okay, so I just want to say a brief word about this book. We've situated his life a little bit. But Surprised by Joy. This is a sort of spiritual autobiography, I think we could call it. It centers around Lewis's conversion to Christianity. It ends right as he becomes a Christian. It doesn't tell anything afterwards. And in that way, it's a very similar book. If you've ever had a chance to read Augustine's Confessions, the Confessions by St. Augustine, it's very similar. Augustine tells his life story from a very early age. He has a profound memory of being, 1 year old at the breast and writing about that. But all aside, the Confessions is actually it's a long prayer written in the second person to God, addressed to God in the second person, and it tells the story of his conversion to Christianity. But this is my point. For Augustine, as for C.S. Lewis, it is not a sudden, dramatic event of conversion. It's not Paul on the road to Damascus, where Jesus appears to him and the scales fall from his eyes and he turns from his ways, he turns around, repents immediately. Those kinds of conversion stories do happen. They are real, of course, but another kind of conversion story also happens. It's the kind that we see in Augustine and the kind that we see in Lewis. There are decisive moments along the way, but all in all, Lewis turned from his atheism to Christianity slowly. He resisted God's mercies upon his life. He resisted God's hand, turn after turn, just as Augustine did. And also for Lewis and for Augustine, I should say this, is that they can't talk about their conversion to Christianity without also talking about a sort of intellectual conversion that's happening at the same time, right? Augustine in the Confessions, he talks about how he dabbled in all these, 4th century Roman religions, Manichaeism and philosophies, Stoicism, Neoplatonism, before he finds rest. He says his heart finds rest in Christianity. And for Lewis, it's kind of the same. His conversion to Christianity is at once an intellectual conversion. He talks about that, but this is the more important part. It is also moral, it is also spiritual, and it is also affective, meaning it deals with the emotions, the heart, desire. That is the sort of guiding motif of Surprised by Joy, is the heart. Lewis can't tell the story of his turn away from atheism without telling the story of his intellectual formation, but also how this intellectual journey was rooted in a more basic, intuitive, and experiential desire that he had from the earliest days of his boyhood. The book displays a sort of constant interplay between reason and intellect on the one hand, and intuition and experience on the other. And it's important, too, to say that Lewis isn't won over to Christianity by an airtight, rational, apologetic argument for the existence of God, about the rationality of the Christian faith. Lewis is won over to the Christian faith because he finds the fulfillment of joy there. And we're going to talk about that. So this book is Lewis's quest for joy, what he calls joy. And I should say a word real quick about what joy is. Usually, in our ordinary language, when we say the word joy, what do we mean? Happiness. Internal peace. What else? Delight. That's a good word, yeah. So, oftentimes when we talk about joy, we talk about all those things, we do talk about a sort of elevated form of happiness, super happiness, right? Pleasure is a word that I didn't hear, but it's related, right? To pleasure sort of to the highest degree. When we hear, as modern people, we hear the Apostle Paul tell the church in Philippi, rejoice in all things. Again, I say rejoice. Sometimes we hear that as a command to be happy all the time, right? But that's not what C.S. Lewis means by joy. So what is joy? Well, let's find out. Let's look at that passage on the front and back. What are the page numbers? So I just have the book right here. 17 and 18. Okay, so this is early on in his life. And he's talking about 3 glimpses that he catches, through memories that are sort of coming back to him of his time as a young boy, that are awakening this deep-seated longing within him that he can't really, it's inexplicable, he can't name what's for. Does someone want to read for us out loud? I'm happy to, but if someone else wants to, I want to give you the opportunity to.
Which one?
We're going to start with the first is itself the memory of a memory. That paragraph, you see that? Yeah, and there's a Greek word, you can just skip over that. Go ahead.
And you'll tell me when to stop?
So read that full paragraph, and then I will pick up, and we'll go from there.
The first is itself the memory of a memory. As I stood beside a flowering currant bush on a summer day, there suddenly arose in me, without warning, and as if from a depth not of years but of centuries, the memory of that earlier morning at the old house when my brother had brought his toy garden into the nursery. It is difficult to find words strong enough for the sensation which came over me. Milton's enormous bliss of Eden, giving the full ancient meaning of enormous, comes somewhere near it. It was a sensation, of course, of desire. But desire for what? Not certainly for a biscuit tin filled with moss, or even, though that came into it, for my own task. And before I knew what I desired, the desire itself was gone. The whole glimpse was gone. The world turned commonplace again, or only stirred by a longing for the longing that had just ceased. It had taken only a moment of time, and in a certain sense, everything else that had happened to me was insignificant in comparison.
The second glimpse came through Squirrel Nutkin, through it only, though I loved all Beatrix Potter books. But the rest of them were merely entertaining. It administered the shock. It was a trouble. It troubled me with what I can only describe as the idea of autumn. It sounds fantastic to say that one can be enamored of a season, but that is something like what happened. And, as before, the experience was one of intense desire. And one went back to the book, not to gratify the desire. That was impossible. How can one possess autumn? But to reawaken. And in this experience, also there was the same surprise, and at the same sense of incalculable importance. It was something quite different from ordinary life, and even from ordinary pleasure. Something, as they would now say, in another dimension. The third glimpse came through poetry. I had become fond of Longfellow's saga of King Olaf, fond of it in a casual, shallow way for its story and its vigorous rhythms, but then, and quite different from such pleasures, and like a voice from far more distant regions, there came a moment when I idly turned the pages of the book and found the unrhymed translations of Tegner's Drapa and read, I heard a voice that cried, Balder the beautiful is dead, is dead. I knew nothing about Balder, but instantly I was uplifted into huge regions of northern sky. I desired with almost sickening intensity something never to be described, except that it is cold, spacious, severe, pale, and remote. And then, as in the other examples, found myself at the very same moment already falling out of that desire and wishing I were back in it. The reader who finds these 3 episodes of no interest need read this book no further. For in a sense, the central story of my life is about nothing else. For those who are still disposed to proceed, I will only underline the quality common to the 3 experiences. It is that of an unsatisfied desire, which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. I call it joy, which is here a technical term, and must be sharply distinguished from both happiness and pleasure. So joy is not happiness or pleasure. Joy, in my sense, has indeed one characteristic and one only in common with them: the fact that anyone who has experienced it will want it again. Apart from that, and considered only in its quality, it might almost equally be called a particular kind of unhappiness or grief. But then it is a kind we want. I doubt whether anyone who has tasted it would ever, if both were in his power, exchange it for all the pleasures in the world. But then joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. So I'm going to put the question to you. And we'll talk about this for a few minutes before we look at his conversion scene. What is joy, as he describes it? And have you ever felt that? Have you ever experienced it? And if the answer is no, that's okay. Yeah. What is joy, as he describes it? And have you ever felt it? It's not happiness. It's not pleasure. What is it?
I think surprise comes with it. You suddenly see a beautiful rainbow or an amazing bird or as you live in the country. And it's brief and it's unexpected.
Yeah. Brief, unexpected. That's right. The sort of common thread, one common thread in all three of those experiences was that it was momentary, right? It came to him, and then it disappeared. It was gone. It's like he caught a glimpse of something.
You
And,
can't say, oh, I'm going to have the rainbow here right this second.
yeah.
Likely.
If you're a Swede, sometimes you don't see joy unless your brain is still. Swedes have a dry sense of humor. It's hard for us to laugh sometimes. So I think unless you're in the moment, it's easy to miss the joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not sought after, unexpected, and brief.
Yeah. So it can't be manufactured or reproduced. It lies outside of sort of the domain of our control, right? It's something that's always given. It's a gift that comes from outside of us.
It's insight, but just a glimpse of the insight. When you say insight, it usually stays. It's a major event, but in the way he's describing it, it's a glimpse at it, but can't keep it.
Yeah. Like the moment you try to grasp it,
Right.
it's gone. It goes away.
I'm sorry to say this, it's going to aggravate folks, but the study of mathematics is like that. It is.
Yeah.
You have to be aware. Yes.
It's definitely something that just comes on you out of nowhere, like mathematics does. When you
Yeah.
see it, when you solve it, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I had an experience just like what he's saying, where in that same moment it's going away, and it's like you don't want it to, you want to hang on to it. I had this experience years ago, and it was nothing. It was people talking about we were doing some good for people in the community. We're going to be gathering food and things like that. And I was home. My kids were very little, and I wanted to take part in that. And out of nowhere, it was nothing. But out of nowhere, it was like I'm going to go to the store and pick up, not just grab things from the house that are extra. I'm going to go to the stores that I'm shopping for my own children. And what would the kids want? What tasty things would they want? Not just what you have lying around. And out of nowhere, I had this feeling of joy.
Mm.
And it was as if I was lifted up.
Yeah.
The entire time I drove to the store, I was shopping around, I had this feeling come over me as though something else was with me. And to me, it was the Lord. It was like just walking along, almost like I was floating. And all I was doing was buying these stupid little things in the store that I thought the children would enjoy. And when I got back to the house and I was putting them in the different bags to bring back to school, it started going away. And it was that whole time, it was almost an hour that I was like just floating along. And as it was going away, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want this to go away. I just want it to stay with me. And even though it was no great thing I was doing, there was this joy
Mm.
that was there with me. And as it was going away, it was like, don't leave. I don't want it to go.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do to hang on to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can joy be triggered by gratitude? Is there a parallel in that?
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, I think so. Yes, of course. Because the whole point of what Lewis is saying about joy is that it's a gift. It's something that we don't we don't merit it. We don't deserve it. It comes upon us and makes this unpredictable landing upon us. And the only proper response to receiving a gift is to say thank you, right? What about, sorry, go ahead, one more, and then let's move on.
The hard part about this, considering what, at least my definition of joy would have been before this, is he attaches unhappiness.
Yes, that's where I was going. Why does he attach unhappiness to it? Deborah, go ahead.
I mean, there is a kind of unresolved tension in the definition, right? Because he says it's an unsatisfied desire.
Yeah.
Which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. So that flies in the face of what we normally think of, that if you want to achieve happiness, that is an emotion that you acquire. Right?
Yeah.
And he seems to be locating joy more in the unfulfilled desire rather than the achievement of that desire.
Yes.
Which is really interesting.
Yep. Okay, yes, sir, and then a few things. Go ahead. Mm.
And you can tear it just like if you're in a supermarket or a big mall and you've lost your child. You have a little child and it's wandering away and you're absolutely terrified. And you're just searching frantically and all of a sudden it lives. And that joy is just, it's a relief. It's at the same time, it's a feeling of happiness. I mean, it's the same thing. It can be just draining.
Yeah. A couple of things. One is that what joy is a deep-seated longing for something, right? That is always just sort of beyond the horizon of what we can grab, right? It's always just a little bit further away than what we can reach for. And yet, the joying for Lewis here is the longing is itself desirable. You want it again. But it's also longing, right? When you and I long for something, it's usually a pretty unhappy state. Grief is a kind of longing, right? It's a longing for something or someone that you have lost. Appetite, right, is a longing for food, for sex, for water. So my point is that it's he's tying it to there's a directionality to joy, right? That he's going after. You long for something, but also his motif that he uses all the time in Surprised by Joy, the image that he uses all the time is a stab, right? He says that I receive these stabs of joy, which is not a pleasurable sort of like analogy, right? It's something that sort of takes us back. It's meant to like reawaken you, to jolt you, and can even hurt you or damage you. I'll say too, Lewis, he's aware of this. He's playing with this German concept. My German pronunciation is terrible, called Sehnsucht. If any of you speak German, I'm sorry. But he talks about this in the book. He's using this concept that means like a deep, inconsolable longing for something, an intense yearning for an unknown sort of like transcendent goal, something that you cannot even like name that you want. It's kind of like a homesickness is a way to think about it. And he feels this, it's important to say, from a very young age, from a very, very young age. And his whole life, from that point onward, he is looking for it, right? The paradox is that you can't like create it, right? But he's spending his whole life looking for it at the same time. He finds it in reading poetry, as we just said. He finds it, as I said earlier, in mythology. He looked for it in the study of philosophy, in friendships, in sex, in experiences that transcend everyday reality. He is on the quest for this experience of joy. And it's important to note, as I said, what he's doing. He's seeking after joy for the sake of experiencing joy itself. This is such a powerful intuition, feeling that comes over him, that joy, this longing, is an end unto itself for Lewis. It's not a means to some other end, right? It's not like he wants whatever it is that he's grasping after. He just wants the feeling of joy. That's how he spends most of his life. That is, until his conversion to Christianity, which is what I want to look at in just, we have 5 minutes left. I don't know if we have time to do this. So here's what we'll do. We're going to stop here. I welcome any comments or questions in just a moment, but we'll pick up with this tomorrow. If only, right? If only. Next Sunday, we'll read this passage because it's really powerful, and it kind of the surprise, and surprised by joy is what comes at the very end in his conversion, and we're going to talk about that next week. So any final thoughts, comments, questions before we dismiss, and I have to go get my dress on for church?
I think Amazon could deliver that book by Tuesday or Wednesday, and someone can read ahead.
Yeah, there you go. If you wanna get surprised by joy, read ahead, by all means. Surprised by Amazon. Surprised by Bezos.
There's also a good audio version.
There's a good audiobook.
Yeah, about 6 hours.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Good audiobook as well if you can get on Audible. Next week, after we finish reading this Surprised by Joy piece, we're going to be talking about faith and reason. And we'll be looking at a couple of short excerpts from Mere Christianity, and I won't be boring you with all the autobiographical stuff of Lewis's life. So thank y'all so much for being here. It was a delight, and I'll look forward to it next week. Okay?
I want to say thank you.
Yeah.